Change is coming to the world. Many fear change and will fight it with every fiber of their being. But sometimes, change is what they need most. Sometimes, change is what sets them free.
Dragon Age has been a franchise that is very close to my heart. Growing up, I started to really develop interests in life when I was a teen. One of those things that I was really into was gaming. Even before that, I already played a lot of video games growing up. You'd see me play your average GTA, Muso, or Sims game. But it wasn't until I experienced two video games that I really knew gaming was more than what it seemed at the surface. Those two games were the first Red Dead Redemption and Mass Effect 3.
Report to the ship as soon as possible. We're bang, okay?
They both taught me that video games could be a form of media and literature too. That you could go through fun while also consuming a beautiful tale of a character's odyssey.
I get it. Game was rigged from the start.
Now, hold on. This video is about Dragon Age, right? Well, remember when I mentioned Mass Effect 3? No, that was a whole rabbit hole. Dragon Age and Mass Effect are both franchises from the same game developer company called BioWare. And my very first BioWare game was Mass Effect 3. I had first seen clips of ME3 on YouTube, how you could make your own different dialogue choices and decisions in that game. It blew my mind. I also saw the scene with Shepard and Miranda and I was just in awe of the gameplay, dialogue, world building, and story. I'm not even a sci-fi or shooter kind of guy. So just imagine when I found out that there was a game like this, but it was medieval fantasy! Let's turn back time to my teen years. I was staying over at my cousin's house, and she had a copy of what would ultimately become one of my favorite settings in gaming ever, Dragon Age. Not just any Dragon Age, it was Dragon Age 2. This game had everything: Mage versus Templar politics, racism,
You can excuse racism.
slavery, whatever this guy was. Enchantment! And I was just so enamored by the themes of the story. This would ultimately lead me to a rabbit hole. I'd soon play Dragon Age Origins, and when Inquisition came out in 2014, I would play that one too. I loved every Dragon Age game, but after Inquisition's Trespasser DLC, Dragon Age faded away with little to no news as the years went by. Until now. So here we are, Dragon Age the Veilguard, a very polarizing entry into the series for various reasons. I bought it, I played it, and 2.5 playthroughs, I'm ready to talk about it. So let's start with the game's visuals. With the first thing we see after the Varric opening, character creation. I thought it was really good. One of the knockout things of this system is the hairstyles, which look amazing. Not just with how much variety of hair types you get, but look, the physics! I've never seen hair physics like this in a video game ever.
Not enough gold in the world for this.
As someone who plays WWE games, I hope 2K could implement something like this. Scratch that. I hope every big AAA title can have this type of hair physics. Aside from hair, you got so many sliders and head morphs to choose from. Colors, tattoos, paint, etc. My personal issue with character creation is you can't really make an older character. There are some weathered complexions, but you don't have the wrinkle sliders like Baldur's Gate 3, and for some reason, the glutes and chest sliders have little effect, but the rest of the body sliders, you can obviously see the changes when you move it. And personally, I thought it was harder for me to make a pretty female character, but that may just be a skill issue on my end. So I just use sliders made by other people. And since we're talking about character creation, let's talk about the art style of characters. The stylized realism of every character in this game is very hit or miss, depending on who you ask. Some people find that it looks off, other people like it. I'm leaning on the latter. I would have shrunk the head sizes a teeny bit, but still, I personally think the style looks good, except for the Kunari and some of the returning characters that came from past games. The Kunari with this game's art style they just look bad. Though for your created Kunari, it's very possible for them to look great, but every other Kunari just looks like an uncanny valley. The only ones I did like were maybe Shathan and the Butcher Dathrata.
What does that mean?
The rest just look uncomfortable, or they were helmet wearing Antam. I think a couple returning characters looked off with the game's art style. Not their design per se, but they just looked unnatural, especially with teeth in Veilguard. When characters talk in Veilguard, their mouths are very expressive, so you'll see characters like Morgan and Solus with their veneer perfect looking teeth. It threw me off when I saw them on screen.
She had that little gap teeth smile before. Now they place the chompers on her.
Surrounded by friends. Surrounded by sharp claws.
For enemy designs, I'd say I'm pretty satisfied with what the game gave me. I like the mercenaries, Antam, Venatori, and you know, we got the undead, the constructs, the dragons. They also look good. The only disappointment for me was the Darkspawn. Now, there is like story reasons why the Darkspawn look different from their past iterations. I get that, but they just don't look as terrifying when, you know, they're glowing. I do like the blight boils and the black pus. It gives me like that Last of Us vibe, but you know, it just gets ruined by, you know, them glowing. It's just not my thing, honestly. They come off as more action horror than, you know, horror. If you get what I mean. The setting and environments visually look stunning. The graphics look great, from the beautiful beaches of Ravane to the rainy architecture of Minrathous' Docktown, to the spooky dungeon-like interiors of Nevarra's Necropolis, to the blight-infested areas like the Osberg Wetlands, the bustling market city of Treviso, the beautiful and brutality of the Arlathan Forest, the crossroads and the lighthouse, bringing out a whole new beauty to the Fade. Or technically, sort of the Fade. I don't know, the game is pretty inconsistent with whether the crossroads is the Fade or not. Maybe a lore expert can shed light on the comment section down below. But there is no shortage of a vast array of environments, and they all look beautiful. Now, there has been debate on whether this game is dark like how Dragon Age Origins is dark fantasy. I will say that visually there are dark and disgusting moments and environments in this game, but whether Dragon Age Veilguard is actually a dark fantasy game, I would say,
Alright then.
the UI of this game looks pretty much like most AAA games that you've probably seen, like the action RPGs like God of War, Assassin's Creed. It's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but I kind of hope for something more unique out of Dragon Age. Very uninspired, but I wouldn't deduct points out of that. It's okay, it's okay. But aside from the visuals, everything is pretty simple and accessible. Speaking of that, there are accessibility options for the game. So if you have impairments like color blindness, there are options for you there, which is good.
Quiet now.
Sound design. I really like the sound design of Veilguard. The sound of the surroundings, your footsteps, the clothing or armor you wear, the combat, it feels good to listen to, especially if you have headphones on. The only negatives are combat noises do overpower the music, which I'm sure you can adjust. There were glitches sometimes where the music would just stop playing when there was supposed to be music. Speaking of music, let's talk about the music of the game. The soundtrack of Dragon Age The Veilguard is entirely composed by Hans Zimmer and Loren Balfe. Some pretty big movie soundtrack names there, though honestly I feel very mixed with the OST they made. I just don't think the soundtrack of Veilguard hits like the music in Inquisition, which was composed by Trevor Morris, and the first two Dragon Age games, which their soundtrack was composed by Inon Zur, or Inon Zur. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly again. A lot of the music in Veilguard either just feels too sci-fi, or they aren't memorable at all.
Was not my grandson. It was dressed in his clothing, but it had been altered with blood magic. You'll have your god killer, and I'll have my grandson.
That's not to say there weren't any songs that I liked. There were some tracks that I absolutely adored. Unfortunately, those didn't make the official soundtrack. All of the songs that I liked weren't even in the album. So I'll just find an unofficial upload from a random YouTube channel.
Oh, I'm ready. How do we start?
First rule, shut up so the dragon doesn't hear us.
Got it.
Now that we're done with the sound and visuals of the game, let's talk about how it feels. Let's dive into the gameplay. Veilguard has drastically changed Dragon Age's gameplay. From Origins' real-time with pause tactical combat to what we have now, which is a hack-and-slash action RPG. This might be an unpopular opinion, but I actually like this change. I found it enjoyable. I'm not really a huge real-time with pause combat kind of guy. If I want to play a game with strategic or tactical combat, I would much prefer turn-based. If a game is real-time, I would personally prefer to mash buttons, so I definitely had much fun with the combat. And honestly, I feel like BioWare did a good job with the combat. I wouldn't say it's done anything groundbreaking or new, but there's definitely a lot of effort with the combat. I finished 2 playthroughs, one as a rogue and one as a warrior. I also have a 3rd playthrough underway, which is of course a mage. Playing all the classes, they feel so different in a good way. As a rogue, I'm fast-paced with sword and dagger and bow. As a warrior, I'm a tank that you can use a sword and shield or a 2-handed weapon. As a mage, I'm shooting fucking kamehamehas for my hands.
You are saying.
I'm saying. Now, even though all the classes play uniquely, unfortunately, a huge caveat to this is combat locks you in as a damage dealer. Party composition is you and 2 other members of your group who can't die, the 2 other members, unlike previous titles, so if you die, it's game over unless your companion has an item that has a revival charge. This leaves you as the one that the enemy will mostly aggro. So if you wanted to main your bow as a rogue, you'd be constantly dodging. As a mage, you can't be a group healer and you're also being lunged at by enemies constantly. Well, yes, your companions can get the enemy's aggression. That's mostly for multi-enemy conflicts. If it's a boss, you are the target for most of the time. That is going to be a huge thumbs down for a lot of players that want to play support roles as opposed to being a damage dealer. But if that's fine with you, there's a lot combat has to offer. You can level progress to different specializations with the skill tree. I was genuinely surprised with how many passives and active skills you could use in Veilguard's skill tree. I believe my best friend called it the path of exilification. And I'm also glad to say that these passives do work, as well as the buffs and bonuses you get from your equipment. For my first playthrough as a rogue, I wanted to go for the Antavan Crow style specialization, which had a bunch of necrotic damage buffs. Same thing with the armor and accessories I had. It felt so satisfying to see myself doing damage to the spongy enemies of this game, and my necrotic damage was working. Now, is the game challenging? There's a lot of difficulty options and even a custom difficulty setting. I tried the middle one and the 2 hardest difficulty options. You can really feel the difference with each difficulty level. Harder settings will definitely have more spongy enemies and you'll take more damage, as well as enemies being more aggressive. Easier difficulties will make you more and more indestructible.
No one can touch
For
me.
enemy variety, I would honestly say it's pretty good in this game. There are different types, like the Venatori, Mercenaries, Antam. Per type has different subtypes. People like Venatori, Mercs, Antam will have their range, their magic, their shielded, and 2-handers. Creatures like Undead and Darkspawn will have their Thralls and their tankier types. As I mentioned, environments look beautiful. Exploring them is very fun, and you'll get the chance to often revisit these areas, except for a few main story ones. Now, the design of these levels itself is a mixed bag. My biggest gripe is the very straightforward puzzles. Usually, you'll be asked to interact with the environment yourself or using your companion's ability. I feel like the game relies on this too much and overplays the gimmick to the point where it became annoying to me. Doing these interact with this object puzzles became a nuisance. Puzzles were easy, so there isn't the challenge you get from them. I understand giving players something to do to make sure the hack and slash combat doesn't become super repetitive, but that doesn't change the fact that these were just tedious. The story and writing. This is the one where I think most people have a negative opinion about. And to say I'm one of them, probably wouldn't be too far off. I love Dragon Age, and I'm about to give Dragon Age some tough love right now, and it's because I care so much about this world, this franchise, that I have to be honest with my review.
So, where were we?
What's up, Varric?
Right. Him.
So, to give a quick recap, Dragon Age the Veilguard takes place 10 years after the events of Inquisition. Much like the wait from Inquisition to Veilguard in real life, we are Rook, someone Varric found to help him with tracking down Solus. I'll talk about Rook more later, but for now we do end up finding Solus at Tevinter's city Minrathous and foil his plans to tear down the Veil, the world of spirits and demons. However, it causes Solus to be sucked into the Veil while also releasing two other elven gods that are imprisoned, Elgar'nan and Gillenane. And you are going to hear those names be said way too fucking much in this game.
Elganon.
Elgar'nan.
Elganon and Gillenane.
Elganon and Gillenane.
Elganon and Gillenane.
Elganon and Gillenane. Elganon and Gillenane.
Elganon and Gillenane.
Take care of the team for me.
Now, let's hop back to talking about my thoughts. I did have fun with this game, a lot in fact, but one thing that kept casting a large shadow over my experience with was the writing. The writing can range from good to absolutely awful.
Alright. The dragon's a fang scorcher that attacked villages. We're close to her lair.
This shouldn't be too bad, right? We fought 2 dragons at once in Hossberg.
The dragons we fought in Hossberg were being ordered around by the gods. They were attack dogs. This is a wolf, a big wolf, fighting in her own territory.
How does that make her stronger though? What?
This is your first real dragon fight.
The 2 dragons we faced were blighted. Like, anong logic nun? Oh, this is a wolf. She has her own free will. And for a Dragon Age game, that is very much below the standard.
You knew? You knew and you still kissed me?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow, I feel drunk.
Yeah, it's because I turned your head into mush.
Or it's love.
You boob. This is not funny.
You boob?
Okay, I'll fix it. I promise. I will find a way and I will fix it. Okay? Okay? Damn it. No, don't touch me.
Okay, overall, main story is fine. It's fine in my books. The last act of the game was actually amazing. Personally, one of my top moments in BioWare and gaming entirely. I was also satisfied with the endings we got. I think it gives a nice resolution to the arcs of Solus, Varric, and Morrigan. Now, for the rest of the story in the game, I did not like it. I was so bored during the first act of the game. Every time you recruit a party member, you can immediately trigger their first companion mission, which all plays the same. It's following them around the environment and just talking. Don't get me wrong, I love experiencing slice of life moments with your crew, but all of the first companion quests play the same, and if that wasn't the problem, we still have to deal with the dialogue. Sabi niya, no one can touch me.
This isn't that. It's just lyrium that's
Red? What? Ano? What kind of explanation is that? Hindi siya red lyrium, it's angry lyrium. Fuck! The dialogue is just a huge downgrade from past games. There are moments of brilliance there. Like, I love talking to Solus, Morrigan, and Emmerich. The rest are either they're okay or just awkward.
Well, wasn't expecting to fight an ogre today. Then again, I also didn't expect to learn that my gods are rampaging around and trying to end the world. Just one of those days.
I think the YouTube channel Skill Up said it best. It feels like you're talking while HR is in the room during these dialogues. Conversations just don't treat the player with any intelligence whatsoever. You hear the names Elven Gods and Elganon and Gillenane over and over again. I'm sure someone can make a compilation of it. There's also the quirky quip kind of dialogue, which doesn't entirely bother me, but I can see it absolutely ruining the experience for someone else.
There are horrors in the depths. They have awakened to you now. Look within for your answers, and beware.
No, wait! I have more questions.
Huh. She does that. Riddles, riddles, riddles. Oh, I'm a rock.
But those weren't answers. She gave me nothing.
The biggest crime for me is just the lack of world building in the dialogue. There's a significant lack of political intrigue in this game compared to the previous games. You know, Origin had the succession crisis of Orzammar and Ferelden. Dragon Age 2 had the Mage Templar Chantry dynamic. Inquisition had Orlay's power struggle plus so many other political powers at play. Veilguard doesn't have that. It has factions, but not all of them are particularly gripping. My personal favorite and what I would recommend for your playthrough is the Grey Wardens. They have the most extra dialogue and plot relevance, since Dragon Age does include the Blight, and Veilguard has a lot of that, and there's a good portion of the game that is very focused on the Blight and the Grey Wardens. So yeah, that's the best faction. The Mornwatch is also interesting as it drops so much lore about Nevarra, which was really interesting. And of course, Emmerich, our companion who's from the Mornwatch, he's also the best. Antivan Crows might come across as whitewashed to you, as they are essentially purely good guys in this game. There's technically only one corrupt Antivan Crow you meet in the entire game. The Shadow Dragons were just kind of a letdown for me. But I don't think that's on the Shadow Dragons entirely. It's just Minrathous and Tevinter itself were just so underwhelming. We don't get to learn much about the Imperium, even though all prior games have set up Tevinter as this big political force. You know, the mages have rights here, and in this game it's just there's a lack of mention of slavery, elf abuse, and the politics of Tevinter, which is a travesty. We don't even get to learn much about Tevinter's version of their Andrastian worship. Nothing about the Chantry, though I believe there are hints about the Black Divine's identity, but I think those were found by codexes in data mining. Veil Jumpers are okay. They have knowledge about ancient elf artifacts, but they surprisingly have less plot relevance than the Grey Wardens, when they probably should have as much, since Veilguard deals with 3 of the Evanuris, the elven gods. The Lords of Fortune, it's such a waste. I feel bad for you if you picked the Lords of Fortune. I'm sorry, Rivain and the Lords of Fortune seem like such a waste in this game. They don't have much involvement. I just wish Veilguard just kept Rivain out and saved it for another time, because the game is trying to bloat and include all of Northern Thedas. I just wish we got more contained settings, because we don't get to see the entirety of every country in this game, just tiny regions. Personally, I'd rather have this over Inquisition's maps, but still, personally, only a slight improvement. Okay, we kind of went back to level design, but let's circle back to dialogue and world building. It's just not what I expected for a Dragon Age game. If this game wasn't a Dragon Age game, it would have been more acceptable, but since it is, it's a gigantic issue. There were times when the dialogue just bored me compared to the very Shakespearean-like banter and different worldviews of characters in past Dragon Ages. Here in Veilguard, you can't even ask people about their political views. And yes, Dragon Age 2 also didn't let you initiate dialogue with companions at any time you could choose, but the characters in Dragon Age 2 were well written. They wore their views on their sleeve, like Fenris hates mages, Anders is against Templars and the Chantry, Sebastian loves and shares the views of the Chantry, etc. I will say though, we do get a lot of lore revealed here. If you love the world of Thedas, this is either going to be something you like or dislike. Why? Well, we get more elf lore, but surprisingly a lot of dwarven lore too. Now you might love it or hate it because the answers are well a certain ancient race was responsible. So that's pretty much most of the answers to your lore questions, including the dwarf stuff too. There's also some Kunari lore too, but you can only get it if you finish Tasha's questline and pick a certain decision. Knowing how many people don't like or are indifferent to Tash, including me, I don't know if that's worth it for you. And finally, two big things I hate the most are what the game tells us about the state of Southern Thedas and the secret ending of the game. I hated it both. I feel those two things were a spit in the face to all of us who played the previous games and wanted our efforts to matter. I'm sorry, what happens to the South? It's utter bullshit. As well as that fucking secret ending. I didn't get the secret ending in my playthroughs. So, you know, I'd rather just pretend it didn't exist. Overall, I'd say the story is good. It was really boring at the start, then picks up in Act 2 and gets to peak in Act 3. I would still say that that's a bad thing, because if you need to spend so many hours to get to the good part, I wouldn't recommend a game like that to players, because not everyone has the patience or time to sit through something like that. And of course, the writing is still subpar, and the state of the South plus the secret endings really ruins all the good things I mentioned. Fuck that! Fuck that secret ending! Fuck! Ugh.
Tell me about the team you've built.
Are they a concern, or...?
You're handling things. This part, what you have now. I just miss the banter about friends.
So let's talk about the characters. Let's start with the main character, Rook. As I mentioned, they are some person Varric found to help him find and stop Solus. And during the failed attempt, he appoints you as the team leader. Why Rook instead of Harding, who's probably the next senior member of the Inquisition remnants? I have no idea, but you, the player, now lead the team. There's a whole not the chosen one thing with Rook, like turning the tables on that main character trope, especially when you compare Rook to past main characters like the hero of Ferelden, the champion of Kirkwall, the herald of Andraste / the Inquisitor. Unfortunately, I just don't think it quite works in this game, because Rook is kind of a blank slate. And I think a huge reason for that is that Rook is a character that you're supposed to have headcanons for. Like, they're as interesting as you make them out to be. The problem with that is the game doesn't give you much role-playing options dialogue-wise. You have the basic 3 dialogue options. Usually you'll have the kind option, the sarcastic option, or neutral option, and then you got the rude or evil option. So what's the issue? Well, in this game, the rude choices, they aren't really evil. You can't be an absolute douche in this game. Even though I don't usually go for evil playthroughs, this is unacceptable for a BioWare RPG. What do you mean you don't have a choice to be an absolute monster of a human being, or someone so cartoonishly a jerk? You can only be a nice or funny guy, and that's the direction the game pushes you in. Not just dialogue, but the entirety of the game. Your Rook will always be a hero. The only way for you to really fuck up is to not do any optional quests. I already noticed it in Inquisition that the rude options were being softened a bit, but here it's at its worst. The douchebag options aren't really that. It's more of a I'm serious or impatient option, and that sucks. The Inquisitor themselves was sort of also a blank slate when you compare them to someone like Hawk, but the Inquisitor had the advantage of good writing, being able to bounce off other characters, and just having more options and being able to talk to companions at will. And we already know how much of a letdown Veilguard's writing is by this point, but the characters are also a mixed bag. My personal favorite is Emmerich. I just think talking to him and his entire character and questline is superb. He was so good that I wanted a Dragon Age game just set in Navarra so I could learn more. There's just so much good writing and voice acting and the Navarran lore that you could get from Emmerich. I also really like Davrin. Most of the Grey Wardens in Veilguard are just really likable. Davrin and his Griffin Asan are just such bros. I love having them around. Davrin's easily my second favorite companion in the game. Belara was someone who actually surprised me. I've been hearing from reviewers how much of a quirky girl trope she is. Like,
Strife and Irulan will want to know about this. And the Blight. And the Darkspawn.
and well, she is certainly that, and has some of that MCU style dialogue. When you get past that, she's really a deeper character. Out of all the companions, her first companion mission was the one that gripped me the most. I really wanted to know what happened next. I also romanced Belara on my second run, and I thought it was such a cute romance. Her and Rook really had some sweet moments when you romance her. Now, opposite of Belara was Tosh.
Thank you. So, I'm non-binary.
Who the fuck starts a conversation like that? I just sat down.
They started out very interesting for me, and I was wondering why people really didn't like Tosh. At first, I found them to be interesting. A fire-breathing Kunari who's also non-binary and has some mommy issues. But the more I played through their companion quests, the game just leaned too much into Tosh's sexuality. And I don't mean in a tasteful way like Dorian in Inquisition, because Dorian was more than just a gay man. He also wanted to be the one to change all the negative aspects of Tevinter. He wanted to be the change so the other places in the world would see Tevinter in a positive light. I do understand as a straight person that most of what I feel is probably coming from a place where I can't relate to Tosh themselves. But I think the game really had set up something really interesting with Tosh as a fire-breathing Kunari. Plus all the possible Kunari lore we could have learned from them and their mother. I will say though that Tosh's final companion quest, no, not the barb scene, before that, it was really good, and the voice actor for Tosh did an excellent job. I think some of the best character stuff for Tosh is in random banter that not everyone will get. Some of their dialogue for missions and at the lighthouse just doesn't do it for me. And I think other characters will suffer from that too. Sometimes we do get important lore drops from banter that will either trigger randomly or it's something we will pass by an NPC talking about. But back to Tosh, I find it funny that a non-binary character gets a really binary choice at the end of their questline. I mean, all companions, you have to make a decision for them, either one or another. For Tosh, it just felt very ironic that the non-binary character has to be either one and not both of something at the end of their story. I think that's not good writing. Next companion I want to talk about is Lucanis. He was another letdown for me, and for a lot of people too. The fandom were treating him like he was gonna be Veilguard's version of Astarion, but he ended up being pretty lackluster, both in romance and just him in general. I don't want to spoil his story, so I'll just say that I feel like the game didn't make use of what he has, and also it doesn't help that we don't get much world building for the Antivan Crows. Like, are the Antivan Crows good guys now? Or are there political changes happening within the organization? Because if you played the older games, you'd assume the Antivan Crows were horrible because of how they treated someone like Zevran, for example. But back to Lucanis. Another big issue people have is his romance. There are a lot of issues with Lucanis' romance. First is an issue with every companion. The romances are very tame and chaste, which is not what was advertised. We were led to believe that this was going to be the steamiest game romance-wise from BioWare. Second is that Lucanus will often flirt with Nev, and the way the romance is set up in this game, you can't commit to a romance with the character until much later in the story. So if you put Lucanus and Nev in the same team, their banter is mostly flirting. Third is that the first big choice in the game can possibly lock you out of Lucanus's romance, but he'll still end up pursuing Nev. Yet you can't romance him anymore? And to top all of that, if you make the opposite choice, the other character that will be affected by your decision will still be romanceable. So it's just Lucanus that gets locked out of a romance if you pick the choice that affects him. It just doesn't make sense in my opinion.
Lucanus, wake up!
Ugh. What the?
Okay, moving to Harding, I thought she was okay. A lot of cringe dialogue you probably see get spread around is either Tash, Belara, or Harding, and yeah, Harding can have those kinds of dialogue. It honestly doesn't feel like Harding has matured 10 years after Inquisition. I did love that Harding's story is connected to a lot of dwarf lore that was set up in Inquisition's Descent DLC. It's just a shame that the ending to her questline was underwhelming. Narratively, it makes sense, but I was expecting more. I don't know. I just hope that there was something new with Harding, I guess. Because looking at other returning characters like Varric, Solus, Morgan, like you can see that there's been changes to the character. Growth, in my opinion. Some of you might not like it, but for me, it's growth. I did think Harding's romance was kind of cute. She was my first romance because I felt more chemistry with her. She's the first character who seems to catch on to you flirting. So pretty early, your flirting attempts do get reciprocated by Harding. So that's why I picked Harding to romance in my first playthrough. She does suffer from some of that adorkable writing, so it might not be your cup of tea. Nev is okay as well. Her questline was kind of boring. I think that mostly lies with how underwhelming Tevinter is, which is where Nev is from, and it's what Nev's questline is mostly above because she loves Docktown. She's very dedicated to Tevinter. It's just a disappointment. I do like the LA Noir detective approach with her character, but it just doesn't translate well to Veilguard's game mechanics. You don't really help Nev with her work, or help investigate, or help come up with evidence, or a solution, or find the culprit. That's all Nev. You're just following her around and being her muscle. There's also a bunch of side characters or returning characters from the factions that you can pick at character creation. I thought the Grey Warden casts were so likable. Antoine and Evka were the best! I love them! Then the rest of the other faction side characters were just... They were okay. Strife, Irlin, Asher, Tarkin, Vorgoth, Myrna, and a spoiler character. Most of the side characters, I think, came from the books and other supplementary Dragon Age material like shorts and comics. Unfortunately, I haven't read any of it, so what I saw in the game was what I got. The Inquisitor and Morrigan are both returning characters that I will talk about since they're not really huge spoilers if you see the trailers and gameplay previews prior to Veilguard's release. They both have little screen time, but they do show up in a very Deus Ex Machina way at times. Inquisitor will be the one to share the news about Southern Thedas, which is fuck! Morrigan has a slight more important role, especially if you play through Solus's side quests. But that's about it for them. Speaking of, yes, if you haven't heard yet, you only get to pick 3 choices from Inquisition to carry over to Veilguard, which is who did you romance, if the Inquisition disbands or not, and if the Inquisitor vows to stop Solus or vows to save him. And I'm proud to say that these choices mean absolutely nothing! Unless you romance Solus and maybe one other character, but the romance Solus choice has bigger differences in dialogue and does actually affect the ending. I've already done 2 playthroughs, and I have another unfinished one that I used for some mage gameplay clips. I will say that Veilguard is a replayable game for a couple or 3 times. After that, it's really up to you. You've probably seen all there is to see. The only replayable differences left would be the romances. Finally, we have performance and technical aspects. I played this on the PS5 and I didn't have any problems with the game. Aside from the rare crash and the no music glitch I mentioned earlier. I don't know if it's obvious with the clips, but everything looks smooth on console. For PC, I heard the game is pretty optimized, which is a great thing. That would probably make Veilguard the most optimized Dragon Age game at release. And that's about it for this review. Before I give a rating and end this video, let me just say that Veilguard in a lot of ways let me down, but in some ways I really enjoyed the game. I do think in comparison to something like Mass Effect Andromeda, I enjoyed Veilguard a lot more. The only positive thing I can remember about Andromeda was probably the gameplay, the combat. For Veilguard, I think this is a game ranging from okay to good, but a huge step down compared to its predecessors in the Dragon Age universe. For me, I will judge Dragon Age Veilguard for its quality. And my friends, I think this game is a 6 out of 10. I could see it being a 5 or 4 for the more critical eye though. I believe Angry Joe gave it a 3. I believe 6 is already a generous score for Veilguard. To give Veilguard that score, I do believe this game is a functional AAA title with solid action style combat that has RPG mechanics such as the skill tree and equipment builds. The final act of Veilguard was a really amazing climax to the journey, but unfortunately, all the good gets thrown out the window when we get to the writing and some questionable level design and some consistency issues. Characters are an entirely mixed bag that also get hampered down by subpar writing, and we have the questionable level design. While we do also get pretty important lore reveals, the world building just takes hits. All in all, I think this is bad. And it ruins the good. Like the bad outweighs the good. So, you know, you can sprinkle toppings on a piece of shit. At the end of the day, it's still a piece of shit. Most of my fun of the game was from my own personal headcanons of Rook and the companions, who were pretty much a blank slate compared to past protagonists and their party members. I feel as though this game is carried by the wonderful community Dragon Age has cultivated over the years. The writers, the artists, the people who post and hyperfixate about Dragon Age. I do love that having a new Dragon Age game has gotten me to reconnect with these people. I cannot say if this game will age well or not. Right now, I do find myself revisiting this game and hope that it will continue someday, but my inherent bias to the worlds of Dragon Age and Mass Effect will not change the fact that Veilguard is a flawed game, above mediocre, but below the standard of past Dragon Age games. And that is what I think of Dragon Age the Veilguard. But I am really thankful that at least we got a Dragon Age game 10 years later. Something set in Thedas. Something that feels like Dragon Age but also doesn't feel like Dragon Age at the same time. It's such a weird feeling. I'm thankful but disappointed at the same time. And that's about it. Take care, everyone. I'll see you soon.